Fateful winter. Winter in London always carries a sense of both grandeur and solitude. The Christmas lights still twinkle along the old streets, reflecting on the pavement drenched by the persistent drizzle. People rush past one another, long coats rustling in the cold wind, creating a rhythm of the city's characteristic bustle. At the Whitmore Grand Hotel, Beatrice Bennett had just finished an intense meeting. She returned to her room, intending to spend a quiet afternoon resting, completely unaware that fate had arranged for her an encounter she could never have foreseen. The door swung open. She turned around, startled. A tall man stepped in, absent-mindedly pulling his phone from his coat pocket, oblivious to the fact that this was not his room. "Excuse me, you've entered the wrong room." Beatrice's voice rang out, filled with suspicion. The man froze. He lifted his gaze, and suddenly the world stood still. Beatrice, standing before Henry Whitmore, was not just a stranger, it was her, the one he had searched for over the past 10 years, the one he had lost. Beatrice went rigid. "Henry?" Her voice cracked. Impossible. The man standing before her, with those deep eyes and familiar features, was the very person she had once loved, and the one who had vanished from her life without a word. The air in the room grew heavy. Their breaths echoed in the tense silence. They stared at each other. Too many questions, too many unspoken words. 10 years. 10 years she had spent trying to forget. 10 years he had spent searching in vain. 10 years they had lost each other. And now they stood face to face, as if fate had finally decided it was time to confront the past. Henry couldn't breathe. His heart pounded so fiercely he felt as if his entire body was trembling. He had imagined this moment hundreds, thousands of times in his head. During lonely nights in New York, staring out of high-rise windows, drowning in regret. During countless business trips through different cities, always hoping that just once, he might glimpse her face among the sea of people. He had walked the old streets of Oxfordshire, where they had played as children, hoping to find some trace of her. He had asked old acquaintances, searched her name online, but found nothing. Beatrice Bennett had completely disappeared from his world, until today. She was here, right in front of him, no longer a shadow from the past, no longer a distant memory. She was real. She was real. Something inside Henry suddenly shattered. He wanted to say something, wanted to ask her why she had disappeared, wanted to tell her he had been searching for her all these years, wanted to know if she had ever thought of him the way he had thought of her, but all he could do was stand there. Beatrice couldn't breathe either. All this time she had believed Henry was a part of her past. She had told herself to forget him. She had thought she would never see him again. But he was here, in the flesh. She didn't know whether to feel happy, sad, or to run away. Because if this was a dream, she wasn't sure she wanted to wake up. They just stood there looking at each other, as if the world around them no longer existed. As if time had rewound itself. As if 10 years of separation had never happened. And then Henry slowly reached out, as if afraid that if he didn't hold on to her this very moment, she would disappear again. "Is it really you?" he whispered, his voice trembling with emotion. Beatrice nodded slightly, her lips quivering. "It's me." And in that moment, Henry knew he would never let her go again. Booker. Life can be overwhelming, but here we share heartfelt tales to bring you peace, joy, and inspiration. Your support, every comment, like, and follow, means the world to us. It motivates us to create more meaningful and uplifting stories just for you. Did our latest story touch your heart? Leave a "I am happy" in the comments if you agree. Subscribe now and be part of a community that spreads love, kindness, and positivity. Let's make every day a little brighter, together. Beatrice tightened her grip on the coffee cup in her hands, as if it were the only thing anchoring her to reality. Henry Whitmore. That name rang in her ears like a distant echo, faint yet painfully clear. Before her was no longer the mischievous boy who used to flash his carefree smile while running barefoot through the vast fields of Oxfordshire. Instead, she faced a grown man, tall, strong, exuding power and authority. Yet his eyes, those same piercing blue eyes, still held the familiar gentleness she had once known so well. Henry, too, was frozen in place. He couldn't look away from her. Beatrice still bore the same delicate features that had lived in his memories. But something was different. Once she had been the girl who laughed easily, her eyes as clear as the summer sky. Now she seemed calmer, more composed. Yet within those eyes there was something that made his breath hitch. A quiet sorrow, a wound that had never healed. Henry was the first to break the silence. "Bea, I never expected to see you here." His voice was hoarse. Beatrice clenched her fingers, willing herself to stay composed. "What are you doing here?" Henry glanced at the door, then down at the keycard in his hand. He blinked, as if just realizing his mistake. "I thought this was my room." Beatrice let out a soft laugh, a laugh devoid of humor. "What a coincidence, isn't it?" They looked at each other, and for a fleeting moment, time seemed to slip backward. More than 10 years ago, they had been two carefree children growing up together amidst the endless green fields of Oxfordshire. Beatrice remembered the summer afternoons when she and Henry would run along the banks of the Thames, leaving behind tiny footprints in the soft earth. When the golden wheat fields swayed in the wind, they would sit beneath the ancient oak tree, reading books Henry had secretly taken from his father's library. "One day I'll run my family's company," Henry had once said as they lay on the grass, watching the clouds drift by. "And what about me?" Beatrice had asked, turning her head to look at her best friend. "You can be anything you want." Henry had smiled, plucking a wildflower and tucking it into her hair. "But whatever it is, I know I'll always be by your side." It was a promise made with the certainty of a child who had never known what it meant to lose someone. Back then, they had believed the world was vast, but nothing could ever separate them. But the world was not as simple as childhood dreams. Everything changed when Henry turned 17. His father had decided to move their entire family to the United States to expand the business. Beatrice couldn't believe it when she heard the news. "You can't leave," she had told Henry on the night before he flew to New York. They stood beneath the old oak tree by the Thames, the place where they had shared so many memories. Beatrice looked at him, her eyes pleading. "I'll come back, I promise." Henry had taken her hand, his fingers warm. Whether to reassure her or himself, he wasn't sure. "I'll write to you, and one day I'll find my way back to you." Beatrice had believed him. She had believed in Henry, in his promise, in their friendship, and in the young love between them. But time moved forward. Beatrice wrote letters. At first, she received a few in return. Then they became fewer and fewer, until eventually there were none. Each time Henry received a letter, he had meant to reply. But business, the pressure from his father, and his new life in America had consumed him. Everything had begun to slip through his fingers. By the time he realized it, Beatrice was no longer where she used to be. And just like that, they had lost each other. Reunion after 10 years. Now Henry stood right in front of her, and Beatrice felt all those memories crashing over her like a tidal wave. She still remembered the feeling of waiting for each letter, the sinking disappointment when she realized there would be no more, the quiet despair when she understood that Henry was never coming back. And yet here he was, standing before her as if time had never passed. "Have you been well?" Henry asked, his gaze filled with emotion. Beatrice took a deep breath, trying to keep her voice steady. "I'm fine. What about you?" But she knew she was lying. Henry let out a soft chuckle. "Not entirely fine, if you want the truth," he admitted. "I tried to find you, but it seems fate didn't want us to meet again too soon." Beatrice didn't respond. She wasn't sure if she could believe those words. Time had changed them. It had pulled them into two different worlds. But as she looked into Henry's eyes, she couldn't deny that a part of her heart had never truly let him go. They sat down at a small table in the corner of the cafe. Beatrice's coffee had grown cold in her hands, but she no longer had the mind to drink it. The unexpected reunion with Henry had brought back a flood of memories she thought had been buried, yet at the same time, it made her realize an undeniable truth. They were no longer the naive children from Oxfordshire. 10 years was a long time. She had grown up, she had changed, and so had Henry. Once upon a time, Beatrice had dreamed of adventures, of becoming a writer or an artist. But life didn't always follow the plans we made. When Henry left and never returned, she had endured years of loneliness and uncertainty. Without him by her side, she had to learn to be strong. After graduating from university, Beatrice chose a different path from many of her peers. She didn't chase fame or wealth. Instead, she devoted her heart to those society had forgotten. Now she was the director of Horizon, a small, nonprofit center in London dedicated to helping underprivileged children, the abandoned, the orphaned, the ones with no one to protect them. Every day she worked to raise funds, organize classes, find sponsors, and ensure the children had a place to call home. Her work wasn't easy. She faced financial struggles, bureaucratic red tape, and exhaustion that sometimes made her want to give up. But every time she saw the children smile, she knew it was all worth it. Beatrice had no regrets. But she also knew that the world she lived in, a world full of hardship and scarcity, was far removed from Henry's. Henry Whitmore, the boy who once lay in the grass reading books with her, was now a successful man, a formidable businessman. After leaving England, he had been swept into the cold, calculated world of his family's financial empire. Henry had no choice. He had been raised to inherit Whitmore and Sons, one of the most powerful financial firms in the country. He had once hated it, but when his father fell ill, duty forced him to take over the company, and as the days passed, he realized he was sinking deeper and deeper into that world. His life revolved around numbers, billion-dollar deals, and extravagant parties with the elite. People spoke his name with admiration. Business magazines hailed him as a young phenomenon in the financial industry. But behind all the glamour, he felt empty. Everything he had achieved was impressive, yet he had never felt like any of it truly belonged to him. And now, standing before Beatrice, Henry realized the distance between them was far greater than he had ever imagined. Two opposite worlds. Beatrice looked at Henry. He was impeccable in his tailored suit, exuding the calm confidence of a businessman. Everything about him radiated wealth, success, and power. And her? She often wore simple clothes, practical for working with the children. Every day she worried about securing enough funding to keep the center running, while Henry could sign a check without a second thought. She remembered the nights she had spent struggling to keep Horizon from shutting down, the countless hours she stayed up writing grant applications, hoping for support. And Henry? He lived in a world of enormous numbers, where a single dinner could cost as much as her center's entire yearly budget. She swallowed hard, feeling a sudden wave of self-consciousness. "I suppose we've changed a lot," Beatrice murmured, her eyes fixed on the coffee cup in front of her. Henry was silent for a long moment before he finally spoke. "But some things never change." Beatrice looked up and met his gaze. Henry was looking at her the same way he always had, like the boy who once promised never to leave her. Something inside her wavered, but then reality pulled her back. They had changed. They were no longer the carefree children running through the fields of Oxfordshire. They belonged to two different worlds now, and perhaps, once again, they were nothing more than two lines crossing for a brief moment, only to continue in separate directions. Henry Whitmore couldn't sleep that night. After their unexpected reunion at the hotel, Beatrice's image lingered in his mind. He couldn't stop thinking about the way she had looked at him, her gaze a mix of surprise, nostalgia, and a hint of hesitation. She was still as beautiful as he remembered, but she was no longer the shy girl from his past. Beatrice had changed in ways he had never imagined, and that only made him want to know more. The next morning, Henry asked his assistant to find out everything about Beatrice. It didn't take long before he had the details about Horizon, the non-profit organization she ran. By sunrise, he was already on his way there. Horizon was located in an old neighborhood in South London, just a short distance from the towering skyscrapers of the financial district. Yet it felt like an entirely different world. The three-story building had a classic charm, though the exterior paint was peeling in places. In the front yard, a few children were playing, their laughter ringing through the crisp morning air. Henry stepped inside, and the first thing he saw was her. Beatrice was kneeling down, tying the shoelaces of a little boy who looked no older than 6. She leaned in, listening intently as the boy whispered something to her, then let out a soft laugh, ruffling his hair affectionately. Henry stood frozen, watching the scene unfold before him. He had never seen Beatrice like this before. She was no longer the shy girl trailing after him in the fields of Oxfordshire, no longer the girl who used to gaze out the window whenever it rained. Now she was a strong, independent woman, a woman who had found her purpose, and Henry felt his heart stir, not because of old memories, but because of the woman she had become. Beatrice felt a familiar gaze on her. When she looked up, her heart stilled for a moment. Henry, he stood there amidst the children, completely out of place in his expensive suit. She wasn't surprised he had found his way here. Henry had always been persistent when he wanted something, but she hadn't expected him to try to step into her life again. "What are you doing here?" She stood up, crossing her arms over her chest. "I came to see your work." Henry took a step toward her, his eyes never leaving hers. "You don't need to do that. Your world and mine aren't the same." Beatrice's voice was firm, carefully controlled. Henry smiled slightly. "Then show me how they're different." "Henry, you don't need to interfere in my life." She knew she was trying to create distance. She knew that if she let him in, he might make her remember emotions she had worked so hard to bury. Henry looked at her, his blue eyes unwavering. "I'm not here because of the past." He took another step closer, closing the space between them. "I'm here because of you, Beatrice." Her heartbeat quickened, but she couldn't let herself waver. She had once believed in Henry, she had once waited for him, and in the end, she had learned how to live without him. She couldn't let history repeat itself. "Henry, you don't understand. This is my life. It's nothing like the world you know." "Then help me understand." Henry tilted his head slightly, his gaze locking onto hers. "Give me a chance." Beatrice said nothing. She wasn't sure she could stop him, but she knew one thing. If she let him stay, her heart might start to feel something again. And that was what scared her the most. The next morning, Beatrice thought Henry had given up, but she was wrong. For the first time in years, Henry Whitmore decided that no one would tell him what he should or shouldn't do. And this time, he wasn't just coming to Horizon to see Beatrice. He was coming to help. 3 days after their first meeting, Beatrice was outside the center, organizing some paperwork, when she heard the familiar sound of a car engine. She looked up. A sleek black luxury car pulled up in front of the gate, and from inside, Henry stepped out. This time he wasn't wearing his usual tailored suit. Instead, he had on a simple gray sweater, looking noticeably more at ease, yet still carrying the unmistakable aura of a man who belonged to a different world. Beatrice crossed her arms. "What are you here for this time? Another social visit?" Henry smiled, but there was a determined glint in his eyes. "I'm here to work." "Work?" Beatrice raised an eyebrow, half skeptical. "I want to help." His gaze was steady. "Whether you like it or not, I'm here." Beatrice sighed. She didn't want to admit it, but deep down she knew she couldn't stop him. Henry had never been the type to walk away easily. "Fine," she said with a shrug, "but if you want to help, you do it my way." "Then show me how." Henry's voice was sincere. In the days that followed, Henry officially became a part of Horizon. He started with the simplest tasks: sorting paperwork, organizing the food pantry, assisting at fundraising events. At first, the staff at the center were cautious about his presence, but over time, they realized he wasn't just here to make an appearance. Henry wasn't afraid to roll up his sleeves. He didn't hesitate to get his hands dirty. He didn't just listen to the children's stories. He genuinely cared. Beatrice still kept her distance, but she couldn't deny one thing. She was getting used to having him around. Some nights they worked late together, and no matter how much she protested, Henry always insisted on driving her home. At first, Beatrice tried to keep things strictly professional, but slowly she realized she was laughing more when he was around. One time, Henry spilled an entire bucket of water while trying to mop the floor, sending the kids into fits of laughter. "Are you sure you used to run a billion-dollar company?" Beatrice teased, struggling to hold back a smile. "I know how to calculate investment returns, not how to clean floors," Henry admitted, looking helpless. Beatrice couldn't help but laugh. For the first time in a long while, she felt lighthearted. Another time, one of the children grabbed Henry's arm and started doodling all over his expensive sweater with colorful markers. Henry glanced down at the mess, then simply chuckled. Well, now you look like an art investor, Beatrice joked. Who knows? This might be worth millions someday, Henry said with a wink. Beatrice laughed, genuinely, freely. And in that moment, she realized something. Henry wasn't just a memory from her past. He was becoming a part of her present. Fate had separated them once. Would it do so again? That night, after all the work was done and the children were asleep, Beatrice and Henry walked through the quiet streets of London. The wind was sharp and cold, but she didn't feel it. Her heart was pounding too fast. Henry slowed his steps, then stopped entirely. "We need to talk," he said, his voice hoarse, as if he had been holding back for too long. Beatrice took a deep breath, her gaze falling to the cobblestone pavement. "Henry, the past is behind us." "But I'm still living in it," he interrupted, his blue eyes burning with resolve. Beatrice shut her eyes, gripping her scarf tightly as if trying to steady herself. "Do you think I haven't lived in that past too?" Her voice wavered. "Do you think I forgot? Do you know how many letters I wrote to you over the years?" Henry froze. Beatrice let out a quiet, hollow laugh, one that carried no joy. "I wrote so many letters, Henry, but I never sent them." He stared at her, as if trying to decipher every word she said. "Why?" His voice was raw, almost desperate. Beatrice lifted her gaze, and for the first time, she let him see the pain she had buried for so long. "Because I was afraid." "Afraid of what?" "Afraid of being disappointed again," she whispered. "Do you remember when I wrote to you and you never wrote back? I was scared that if I sent another letter, I would finally have to face the truth, that you had forgotten me, that you had moved on, that you had built a life where there was no place for me." Henry's lips pressed into a thin line. She didn't know. She had no idea that he had spent years searching for her. "Beatrice?" He exhaled, his hands clenching unconsciously. "I never forgot you. Not for a single day." Beatrice let out a quiet scoff, but her eyes held uncertainty. "How can I believe that when you never came back?" Henry met her gaze head on, his emotions no longer concealed. "Because I did come back." Beatrice's breath caught. "What?" "I came back, Beatrice." Henry's voice was slow, deliberate, each word cutting through him like a blade. "Just a few months after moving to the U.S., I realized I couldn't bear being without you, so I flew back." Beatrice felt the world tilt beneath her feet. But, but I wasn't there." Henry nodded, his expression shadowed with old pain. "No, you weren't. When I returned to Oxfordshire, you were gone." "That's not possible," she murmured, her hands trembling. She had waited. She had hoped. But the moment he came back, she was no longer there. "I looked for you," Henry continued, his voice lowering. "I asked the neighbors, our teachers, everyone I could think of. But no one knew where you had gone." Beatrice felt a lump rise in her throat. I I moved to London to live with my aunt after my mother passed away," she whispered. "I didn't leave any trace because I thought there was nothing left to wait for." Henry inhaled sharply. "I was desperate to find you," he admitted. "I went to all the places we used to go, hoping you would return. But you never did. I even wrote letters to your old address, but none of them were ever answered." Beatrice stood motionless. For years she had believed that Henry had never come back. But the truth was, he had come back. Fate had simply torn them apart once more. Henry took a step closer, his hand instinctively reaching for her, but hesitating in midair, as if afraid she would vanish again. "I never stopped looking for you," he said, his voice rough with emotion. "Every time I traveled to a new city, I hoped I would see you in a crowd. Every time I caught a glimpse of a girl with long brown hair, my heart would race, only for me to be disappointed again." "Henry," Beatrice whispered, tears slipping down her cheeks. He let out a soft, bitter laugh. "And then, on an ordinary day in the middle of London, I walked into a cafe, and you were there." He took a deep breath, his eyes locking onto hers. "Do you know what that moment felt like?" Beatrice shook her head, her silent tears falling freely now. Henry stepped even closer, his voice soft yet powerful. "It felt like I could finally breathe again." They stood there, in the middle of a bustling London street, yet it felt like they were the only two people in the world. 10 years. 10 years apart, 10 years searching, and finally they had found each other, not in a dream, not in faded memories, but here, in this moment. Henry's voice was steady, resolute. "I won't lose you again." Beatrice looked into his eyes, and for the first time in years, she felt something stir inside her. A flicker of belief, fragile yet undeniable. But beneath it all, fear still gnawed at her. Henry could be here now, but what about the future? He belonged to a world of billion-dollar deals, extravagant galas, and numbers she could never comprehend. No matter how much she wanted to believe in this moment, she knew, sooner or later, he would leave again. Could she ever step into his world? Or would she just be another fleeting presence in his life? Beatrice wasn't sure if her heart could survive losing him a second time. The time Henry spent at Horizon did not pass peacefully. As soon as news of his presence at the charity center reached the Whitmore family, everything changed. That morning, Henry was helping Beatrice organize the financial records in the center's office when his phone rang. He glanced at the screen. A familiar number. His mother. "What is it, Mother?" Henry answered, his voice calm. "Henry, what on earth are you doing?" Lady Whitmore's sharp voice cut through the line, skipping any formalities. "All of London is talking about how you've been spending time at some rundown charity instead of focusing on the company. Do you have any idea what this is doing to the family's reputation?" Henry tightened his grip on the phone. He had expected this reaction. "I don't care about reputation. I'm just helping a friend." "A friend?" his mother scoffed. "Beatrice Bennet? An insignificant girl running an unheard-of charity? Are you joking, Henry? Where do you think this is going?" Henry sighed, trying to keep his irritation in check. "Mother, I'm an adult. I can make my own decisions." "No, you cannot. This family has responsibilities, traditions, and I will not let a girl like Beatrice ruin your future." "You don't get to decide who I have in my life." Henry's voice was firm. "Then perhaps you've forgotten that I've already found the perfect match for you." Henry frowned. "What are you talking about?" "Charlotte Kensington has just returned from Paris, and you know very well, she is the ideal choice." Henry went rigid. Charlotte Kensington returns. Charlotte Kensington was the daughter of an old aristocratic family. Beautiful, intelligent, and perfect by high society standards. She had long been the woman Henry's family wanted him to marry, but Henry had never truly paid her any attention. And now Charlotte was back in London. Not long after his mother's call, Henry received a message from Charlotte, inviting him to dinner for a catch-up. He knew all too well that this was a carefully arranged meeting, but Henry didn't expect Charlotte to take things even further. On a cold afternoon, Beatrice was tidying up the children's toys in the yard when a luxurious Bentley pulled up in front of Horizon. A woman stepped out, Charlotte Kensington. She was stunning, poised, her golden hair cascading in perfect waves, wrapped in an expensive Burberry coat. As she approached, the sharp clicks of her high heels echoed against the pavement. Her gaze, cold and assessing, locked onto Beatrice. Beatrice immediately sensed the confrontation in those eyes. "Are you Beatrice Bennet?" Charlotte's voice was crisp, authoritative. "Yes, I am." Beatrice remained calm. Charlotte gave a thin smile. "I'm Charlotte Kensington. I assume you've heard of me." Beatrice didn't respond, but she knew she didn't need to. She already understood exactly who Charlotte was and why she was here. Charlotte stepped closer, crossing her arms. "I'll get straight to the point," she said coolly. "You don't belong in Henry's world." Beatrice froze for a second but kept her composure. "I'm not sure what you mean." Charlotte let out a quiet chuckle, though there was no warmth in it. "Oh, you know exactly what I mean, Beatrice. Henry is the heir to one of the largest financial empires in England. And you." She glanced around the modest charity center, her expression unreadable. "You run a tiny nonprofit with no real future. Do you honestly think you can hold on to him?" Beatrice clenched her fists. "If Henry is free to choose, I don't think this is any of your business." Charlotte narrowed her eyes. "Do you really think this will last?" She tilted her head slightly as if assessing a challenger. "You are nothing more than a fleeting distraction. Henry will not throw everything away for you." Beatrice's chest tightened at those words. "Then you don't know Henry as well as you think you do," she replied. though her voice had lost some of its initial strength. Charlotte caught the hesitation. She smirked, a knowing, almost victorious smile. "Do you really believe you're special, Beatrice?" Her voice was almost taunting. "Do you think Henry will choose you over his family, his reputation, and his entire future?" Beatrice said nothing, because in that moment, doubt began to creep into her heart. Did she really belong in Henry's world? Was she truly important enough for him to sacrifice everything? She had been left behind once before. Could she risk it happening again? Charlotte seemed to recognize the flicker of uncertainty in her eyes. Satisfied, she gave a polite, graceful nod before turning away, leaving Beatrice standing there, alone with the flood of questions and fears now unraveling in her heart. That night, Beatrice sat alone in her office, staring out the window. Outside, London remained as lively as ever, but in her heart the world seemed to slow down. She replayed every moment with Henry, his persistence, his smile, the way he looked at her with such undeniable sincerity. But then Charlotte's words echoed in her mind. "You don't belong in Henry's world." Beatrice clenched her hands. Should she leave? Should she end this before it was too late? She didn't know. But for the first time since reuniting with Henry, she was afraid. The growing distance. Beatrice sat in her small office at Horizon, her gaze silently drifting out the window. Outside, the children were playing in the yard, their laughter carrying through the crisp London air. But inside, she felt no peace. She couldn't shake the memory of her encounter with Charlotte Kensington. Charlotte hadn't needed to say much. No threats, no insults. She had simply appeared, elegant, refined, so impeccably perfect that Beatrice suddenly felt like an outsider. She had once believed she could fight against prejudice, that she could trust in what she and Henry had. But after seeing Charlotte next to him, she realized something. They belonged to the same world and she did not. Henry might not care about those boundaries, but was love strong enough for him to truly give up everything for her? And if she kept holding on, was she only leading him down a path with no future? The thought weighed heavily on her. In the days that followed, she began to pull away. When Henry came to the center, she found ways to stay busier than usual, spending more time with the staff, going on field visits, organizing events, anything to avoid facing him. She didn't want to meet his gaze, filled with honesty and conviction, because she knew if she let herself look too long, she wouldn't be able to keep pushing him away. "Beatrice, Henry's here to see you," one of the staff members, Lydia, said softly when she saw him standing outside. Beatrice tightened her grip on the stack of documents in her hands. "Tell him I'm busy, but he said he just wants to see you for a moment." "I'm very busy, Lydia." Her voice was sharper than necessary, making the younger woman pause before nodding hesitantly. Beatrice remained still, listening to Lydia's footsteps as she walked away. She closed her eyes and took a deep breath. "I'm sorry, Henry." She knew he wouldn't give up easily, but she couldn't let herself fall deeper into something that might only end in heartbreak. At first, Henry didn't think much of her distance. He assumed Beatrice was simply overwhelmed with work, that she needed more time. But then, when his calls went unanswered, when his messages received only brief responses, he knew something had changed. Late one night, sitting in his apartment, Henry dialed her number again. Once, twice, 3 times. She didn't pick up. He leaned back in his chair, gripping his phone tightly. Beatrice had never been one to stay silent like this. She was avoiding him, and that realization clenched painfully around his heart. Henry wasn't a fool. He had noticed her avoiding him, seen how she always found an excuse to stay busy whenever he visited the center. She was trying to push him away. But why? Was it because of Charlotte? Because of his family? Or because she didn't believe in them? Henry had never been one to give up easily. He had searched for Beatrice for 10 years. And now that he had found her, he wouldn't lose her again. Not without knowing the real reason. He stood up, grabbed his coat. If Beatrice didn't want to see him, then he would go to her. And this time he wouldn't let her run away. That night, a crisis struck. Beatrice felt an unbearable weight in her chest. She was still lost in her thoughts when her phone suddenly rang. It was a call from Horizon. She answered immediately and a panicked voice came through the line. "Beatrice, it's Tommy. He's had an accident." Beatrice froze. Without hesitation, she rushed to the hospital. Meanwhile, Henry arrived at Horizon looking for her. Lydia informed him about Tommy's accident and that Beatrice was at the hospital with him. In that same conversation, Lydia mentioned Charlotte's visit. It was all Henry needed to understand the situation. He had to prove to Beatrice that his love for her was real, that nothing, not his family, not society, not even fate, could stand in the way of what he felt for her. An unexpected tragedy. Tommy was one of the children Beatrice cared for most at Horizon. At just 8 years old, he was small and frail, but he had the brightest smile. He had been at the center since he was 5, abandoned on Horizon's doorstep on a freezing winter night. Beatrice sprinted out of her office, hailed a taxi, and rushed to the hospital. By the time she arrived, Tommy had already been taken into emergency care. The doctors informed her that he had been hit by a car while crossing the street to buy sweets with his friends. His injuries were severe, especially a head trauma. "We need to perform surgery immediately," the doctor said, "but the cost will be significant." Beatrice bit her lip hard. Horizon was always struggling financially. They scraped by month to month, barely managing to keep the center running. She knew the surgery would require an enormous sum of money, far more than Horizon could afford on such short notice. She grasped Tommy's tiny hand, tears falling onto his pale cheeks. "I'll find a way, Tommy, I promise." But how? She had already exhausted every potential source of funding, reached out to donors, and pleaded for help. But the amount needed was simply too large, and without immediate payment, the hospital wouldn't proceed with the surgery. For the first time in a long while, Beatrice felt utterly powerless, a shocking revelation. The next morning, she returned to the hospital, her mind in turmoil. She still hadn't found a way to save Tommy. But as she approached the reception desk, she was met with news that left her stunned. "The medical bills have been fully paid." "What?" Beatrice couldn't believe her ears. "A man came in early this morning and settled the entire cost. He didn't leave a name, just said that it was his responsibility." Beatrice's heart skipped a beat. She already knew who it was. She rushed straight to Horizon, and as she had expected, Henry was there, standing in her office, as if he had known she would come looking for him. "It was you, wasn't it?" Beatrice's voice trembled. Henry didn't deny it. Instead, he simply said, "A life is more important than anything else, isn't it?" Beatrice clenched her fists. "Henry, I can't let you do this. That was an enormous amount of money." "Beatrice," Henry cut her off, his voice steady. His eyes held nothing but certainty. "I don't need your gratitude. I don't need you to feel guilty. I just need to know that Tommy will be okay." A lump formed in Beatrice's throat. She knew that for Henry, money was never the issue. But what truly moved her was how he had done it, without seeking recognition, without expecting anything in return. Simply because he cared. Henry thought that this time, he could choose his own path. But he had underestimated his family. The moment he paid Tommy's medical bills, Lady Whitmore found out, and she was far from pleased. That evening, Henry received a call from his mother, demanding that he return to the Whitmore estate immediately. When he stepped into the grand living room, Lady Whitmore was already there, poised, elegant, but with eyes as cold as ice. She didn't waste time. "Henry, you've gone too far." Henry crossed his arms over his chest, his gaze unwavering. "What are you forbidding me from doing this time? You've become too entangled in this relationship, and I cannot allow it to continue. It's time for you to make a choice." Her voice was sharp, unyielding. "What do you mean?" Henry asked. Lady Whitmore rose from her seat and stepped closer to him. "You have two choices, Henry." She spoke each word with careful precision. "You marry Charlotte and keep everything that belongs to you. The company, the family name, the wealth." She paused, her piercing gaze locking onto his. "Or you continue to chase after Beatrice and lose it all." Silence filled the room. Henry stared at his mother, and in that moment he understood. This was no idle threat. If he chose Beatrice, he would lose his inheritance, his position, even his family. But he also realized something far more important. He couldn't trade love for the illusion of security. Henry took a deep breath, then replied, his voice calm and steady, "You can keep all of it, Lady Whitmore's expression faltered. She had not expected this. Henry, what are you saying? He met her gaze without hesitation. I won't marry Charlotte. I don't need the family fortune. If I have to choose, I choose Beatrice. He chose her, and she chose him. Less than a week later, Henry officially resigned from his position at Whitmore and Sons. He knew his decision would send shockwaves through the financial world, but he didn't care. When Beatrice heard the news, she rushed to find him, panic evident on her face. Henry, you can't do this. I can. Henry smiled, his eyes unwavering. I don't need $1 billion company if I can't have you in my life. Tears welled up in Beatrice's eyes, hot and uncontrollable. She had never imagined Henry would be willing to give up everything for her. You're such an idiot, she whispered. Henry chuckled softly, brushing his fingers against her cheek. If being an idiot means I get to be with you, then I gladly accept it. And for the first time, Beatrice didn't run away. She stepped forward and wrapped her arms around him. Because this time, Henry had chosen her, and she had chosen him. A love that withstood time. Winter slowly faded, leaving behind crisp air and warm golden light stretching along the Thames. Beatrice and Henry walked slowly along the old cobblestone path by the quiet river. The wind played with Beatrice's hair, and Henry instinctively tightened his grip on her hand, as if afraid that if he let go, she would disappear. They had come so far, from children running wild through the fields of Oxfordshire, to years of separation, to the trials that had led them here. Beatrice looked up at him, her blue eyes shining under the streetlights. Are you okay? She asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Henry smiled, soft, teasing, but also filled with a quiet relief. I have nothing left. His deep voice held no regret. Beatrice paused for a moment, then she smiled, a smile full of warmth and certainty. You have me. And in that instant, Henry dropped to one knee, right there on the cobbled path beside the river, where they had once played as children. Beatrice's breath hitched. From his pocket, Henry pulled out a small velvet box. Not a lavish diamond ring, but a simple silver band, engraved inside with 4 words, My forever, my home. I lost you once, Henry said gently, but this time, I won't let it happen again. I don't have $1 billion empire anymore. I don't have a title, but I have one thing I am more certain of than anything else. I have you. Beatrice, will you stay with me? Not because of who I used to be, but because of who I am, the man who loves you. Beatrice couldn't stop the tears. She didn't need wealth. She didn't need power. She just needed him. Yes. Henry laughed, slipping the ring onto her slender finger. She was no longer the girl afraid of distance. Now she was ready to stay, forever. A wedding full of love. They had a small, intimate wedding, nothing extravagant, nothing ostentatious. Horizon became their wedding venue, not in a grand ballroom, but right in the center's little garden, where children ran around holding flowers in their tiny hands. Beatrice wore a simple yet elegant white dress, while Henry opted for a relaxed suit. They exchanged vows beneath the soft glow of string lights, surrounded by laughter and the genuine joy of those who truly loved them. And when they shared their first kiss as husband and wife, Horizon erupted with cheers and applause. The children tugged at Beatrice and Henry's hands, dancing around them, a pure and innocent blessing unlike any other. Henry leaned down and whispered into Beatrice's ear, Today, I didn't just marry you. I married Horizon too. Beatrice laughed, wrapping her arms around his neck. So, do you regret it? Henry shook his head, his smile radiant. Not for a second. A new beginning. After the wedding, Henry and Beatrice poured their hearts into Horizon. Henry used his business expertise and connections to expand the center, securing more funding and launching new projects to support street children. Together, they worked side by side, creating change, replicating Horizon's model in other cities. Their life was no longer lavish. No elite parties, no extravagant dinners in Michelin-starred restaurants. But every morning they woke up beside each other. Every day they walked hand in hand on the path they had chosen was a life full and complete. And then one day, a tiny miracle entered their lives. When Beatrice gave birth to their first son, Henry couldn't hold back his tears of joy. Holding the tiny baby in his arms, Feeling the small heartbeat pulsing in his hands, he realized this was the greatest treasure he had ever had. They named him Theo Whitmore, a symbol of their love and hope. Beatrice looked at Henry, her eyes filled with love. "You once had everything," Henry murmured, his gaze never leaving their child. "But now, I finally have everything." Beatrice squeezed his hand gently and rested her head on his shoulder, feeling more complete than ever. A mother's acceptance. Henry had believed his mother would never forgive him. But on a winter day, as snow blanketed the road in front of Horizon, a black Rolls-Royce pulled up quietly at the entrance. Lady Whitmore stepped out, poised as ever, though there was no longer sharpness in her eyes. She saw Beatrice holding Theo, Henry standing beside them, his face filled with happiness. She remained silent for a long time before finally speaking, her voice lower, carrying an emotion Henry had never heard before. "Henry, I think it's time for me to accept things as they are." Henry gently squeezed Beatrice's hand. Lady Whitmore turned to Beatrice, her gaze firm but no longer distant. "Beatrice, perhaps I was wrong about you." Beatrice smiled softly, sensing an invisible wall finally breaking. Lady Whitmore then looked at the small child in Beatrice's arms and reached out a hesitant hand. Theo grasped her finger, tight as if he too was accepting her. And in that moment, everything changed, forever together. On the banks of the Thames, where it had all begun, Henry and Beatrice walked hand in hand, guiding little Theo along the cobbled path beneath the fading sunset. Henry leaned down, pressing a kiss to Beatrice's forehead, and whispered, "We once lost each other." Beatrice smiled, gripping his hand tighter. "But this time, we'll never let that happen again." And so they walked forward, no longer afraid of the past, no longer anxious about the future, because finally they had each other. Forever. True love is a choice. Love isn't just about shared history, it's about choosing each other in the present. Beatrice and Henry had spent 10 years apart, but what brought them back together wasn't nostalgia. It was the love that had never faded. The greatest barrier in love isn't wealth or status, it's doubt. Beatrice feared they came from different worlds, but Henry's unwavering determination proved that love knows no limits. Sometimes we have to fight for our happiness, face our past, and choose what truly matters. Happiness isn't perfection. It's walking together, overcoming trials, and building a future more meaningful than anything that was lost. Thank you for following this heartfelt story of. Share your thoughts about the story in the comments below. If you believe that true love can withstand all trials and sometimes begins in the simplest of ways, don't forget to hit the like button and share this story with your friends. To never miss out on touching and meaningful stories, subscribe to our channel and help us spread messages of love and warmth to everyone. Let's cherish the beautiful moments of life and love together.